speaking to you today about China's work to return to supremacy. So just to start, I have a couple questions as food for thought. Firstly, is China a threat to the rest of the world? And additionally, is China working towards political and economic hegemony? And I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have an answer to those two questions. So just the big idea that I want to be talking to you about is at the beginning of the 21st century, when China first emerged as a world superpower, it kind of seemed like the first time that we've seen China on the world political stage. However, this is not the case. In Tang Dynasty China, so about 618 to 908 CE, Tang Dynasty China was the epicenter of all things economic and political. It was the epitome of civilization. It wasn't a civilization on Earth, it was the civilization on Earth. And recently, they've created the One Belt, One Road initiative. And this initiative is one of a few different initiatives that seek to reassert China's dominance on the Eurasian continent and beyond. So just a little bit of history. Tang Dynasty, like I said, was from 618 to 908 CE. Everything in orange here is the Tang Dynasty border. So it went from the east coast of China all the way west to Turkmenistan, all the way south to Vietnam, and north to the Koreas. So it was an extensive country. It was also very modern because during this time you had the Silk Road where you had an influx of new goods, you had new people. It was a time of learning from other cultures and other religions. You had Persians, you had other Asians, you had Christians, Taoists, Muslims, all sorts of people conglomerating in one area. In this way, it was also cosmopolitan. It had huge cities. We'll speak on the next slide about Chang'an, the city that was the capital at the time. And it was also enormously wealthy. At this time, because of the Silk Road, China wanted for nothing. During this time, you had the tributary system, which was Sinocentric in that China was the political center and the economic center. And if you wanted political legitimacy or any trade agreements, you had to acknowledge China as the supreme power. So as I said, we're going to talk a little bit about Chang'an. Chang'an was massive. So the city was 70 square kilometers as compared to 14 square kilometers within Rome and 12 square kilometers of Constantinople. To give you an idea, the next biggest city in the world outside of China was Baghdad, and even Baghdad was only 30 square kilometers. So Chang'an was nearly twice the size, it was more than twice the size of the next largest city. It housed 2 million people if you included its suburbs. It was also cosmologically perfect. It was 108 perpendicular roads. It had temples to all sorts of Chinese gods, Buddhist gods, Confucian, Persian gods, you name it, they had it. So what is the impact of history on modernity? So as Yan Xuetong says it most eloquently, the rise of China is granted by nature. In the last 2,000 years, China has enjoyed superpower status several times, even as recently as 1820, just 20 years before the Opium War. China accounted for 30% of the world GDP. To give you an example, that's the US's current contribution to world GDP as of this year. This history of superpower status makes the Chinese people very proud of their country on the one hand, and on the other hand, very sad about China's current international status. They believe China's decline to be a historical mistake which they should correct. All this to say, this is one of the reasons why we have the One Belt, One Road, OBOR, or the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. They have a lot of different names for it. It was conceived in the fall of 2013 by President Xi Jinping of China. It traverses 3 different continents. You have Asia, Europe, and Africa, with the potential to expand even to Latin America. It has the participation of 76 different countries who have all agreed to this initiative. And they've already spent $70 billion as of July 2018, according to the Mercator Institute of China Studies. And the BRI incorporates 3 separate routes, which I have about. So you have a land route that follows the old Silk Road route. You have a water route that'll go goes through the Strait of Malacca, around the Indian Peninsula, up through Africa. And then the new addition is an Arctic route, which is really hard to see because it's blue, but it goes all the way around the top of Russia and comes down to Europe that way. Now, why is this important? Why, especially the Arctic route, why is it important? Well, it cuts travel to Europe by 12 days and 300 tons of fuel. That's a lot for one ship. And now you're thinking they got a bunch of ships doing that. So that's quite a significant way to save money. Additionally, the Arctic houses 1/3 of the world's natural gas resources and a plethora of hydrocarbon and minerals. Someone said, one of my experts said that the economic potential of the Arctic region is approximately $450 billion US. And by 2020, so just next year, 5 to 15% of China's trade will be through the Arctic route. So they have the potential to reach a lot of economic resources. This is also important because as of this year, they have 2 ships that can go through the Arctic route. The US also has 2 ships. One is out of commission, and the other one they decided not to repair. So we're practically out of the region entirely. So something to consider. By the time of its estimated completion in 2049, OBOR will stretch from the edge of East Asia all the way to East Africa and Central Europe, and it will impact a lengthy list of countries that account for 62% of the world's population and 40% of its economic output. Most of the funding for massive deep water ports, lengthy railroads, and power plants will be coming from the purse strings of Chinese companies. Some will be grants, but many are taking the form of loans, and when countries default, there can be consequences. In Pakistan, for example, a deep water port in Gwadar is being funded by loans from Chinese banks to the tune of $16 billion. The only problem? The interest rate is over 13%, and if Pakistan defaults, China could end up taking all sorts of collateral as compensation, from coal mines to oil pipelines. So, how are they getting their money? Through loans. But if people default, that means they have 76 countries worth of economic potential to get for themselves and to use and to invest. So another thing to consider is their work in Southeast Asia, which I won't get into too much, but there's some experts from the Council of Foreign Affairs have said that using their economic coercion through promised or scuttled Belt and Road Initiative aid projects, and investments can force Southeast Asian states to accept a China-dominated regional order within the next decade. So we could see a China, Sino-centric Southeast Asia that, because of economic coercion, will be forced to do China's political will. What does that mean? That means dominance in Southeast Asia could stifle India's economic growth, because India is posed to be the next economic power after China. China should be the top economic power by 2029. India will be by 2030. But with superiority in Southeast Asia, supremacy, they can stifle that growth, making sure that India comes nowhere close. They could have control of Vietnam, which is the next major manufacturing epicenter after China, because China is moving to a more service-based economy. A Sino-centric Southeast Asia also poses diplomacy problems for the US, in that they can't make their own political decisions. They would have to default to China. The ramifications of BRI is that they have billions of dollars of extra revenue, but they get expense cuts because of the overland route and because of the Arctic route. The BRI completion will also allow more investments into other countries, allowing them to use their massive economy to coerce other people, other nations, into their political will. It also poses a security issue. As is normal, you want to protect your investments, but this means that it allows China to have a standing military organization in every country attached to the BRI. So you have a standing Chinese military presence in up to 76 different countries. So just some final thoughts. The world order is changing. The policies of modern day China serve to promote and expand their sphere of influence not only on the Asian continent, but beyond. We're seeing the rise of China as the preeminent world leader, and while some experts say that economic supremacy doesn't necessarily translate to political supremacy, in this case my research shows that for China it does. And then lastly, the US cannot continue its lackadaisical approach to China because this is happening, this is real. China already believes that the US is weak. A top Chinese naval officer said this at the beginning of the year, that the US has 5 cornerstones open to exploitation, and one of them is the fear of adversaries. We're too scared to get in wars anymore. So the US should be vigilant for opportunities to assert prowess to attain economic parity, not to necessarily outdo China or to take them down a notch, but to make sure that we don't allow them to take over the world, and that we just need to heed the warning and be aware of what's going on. Thank you. Any questions?
How likely do you think it is that there will be a full completion of the one road?
I think it's very likely, especially, so like I said, it goes through into Africa, and China has already set up 5 special economic zones in Africa, and their approval rating for their political and economic system is 63% when polled by like 34 different countries. So it's very likely. A lot of people really like this. It's also supposed to improve the living conditions of every country that it goes through. It's because there's so much Chinese capital being poured into those countries. So I think it's very likely that it will be completed.
Is it really actually improving the living conditions of the people that they're going through?
I haven't been able to find that out yet, just because I didn't get a chance to really look at each individual country and see what they're saying. But I would imagine that having to build infrastructure in all of those countries provides more jobs, which raises wages, which could improve the living standard.
Okay, because that's part of one of the justifications for being in Tibet, right? In countries like that, is that they've improved the living conditions if they use local labor.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was actually reading an article of they're building like a railroad system through certain parts of Africa as part of that initiative, and they're actually importing labor from China, and they're not sourcing locally, so it's not improving situations.
So
in
yeah,
Africa, at least.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And you know, the loans that they're giving, for instance, they just gave a loan to Sri Lanka in return that they now get Sri Lanka for 99 years. So that's the kind of stuff that, yeah.
They get
like, I have to look at my paper to see the exact wording, but they gave a loan to Sri Lanka, and in the terms of the loan were like they get some of their natural resources and stuff for like the next 99 years as like collateral for the loan.
What did they have so far of the one road? Because I know they've like started establishing stuff economically in Africa at the end of where it is to go. But are they working both ways, inward, or is it going?
I believe so. I have to do more research to see where we're at right now, but I know that they were starting to build infrastructure in China. They've already started using the Arctic route of the BRI, so that we're already working on, and they are building more boats for that. And then, like I said, I know they're doing stuff in Africa as well, so I'm assuming they're just kind of meeting in the middle.